The classroom fell silent the way silence only falls when something unforgivable has just happened. 23 fifth graders held their breath as Mrs. Patricia Hargrove stood over 11-year-old Maya Thompson, her manicured finger pointed directly at the door. The words still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. "Get out," the teacher had said, her voice trembling with a rage that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than this moment, somewhere uglier. "I will not have liars in my classroom, especially liars like you." Maya's desk had been shoved backwards so hard that her books had scattered across the floor like fallen birds. The little girl's hands were shaking, but she did not cry. She had learned a long time ago that tears were a currency she could not afford to spend in front of people who wanted to see her break. What Maya did not know, what nobody in that room could possibly know, was that in exactly 47 minutes, the door to this same classroom would open again, and the woman who would walk through it would change everything. The teacher who had just humiliated a child for claiming her mother was a Navy SEAL was about to come face to face with the living, breathing truth, and she was going to freeze like she had seen a ghost. If this story is already pulling at something inside you, take a moment right now to hit that subscribe button for Acts of Depth. Every time you share these stories or leave a like, you help bring more moments of truth and redemption into the world. Now let us go back to the beginning, because to understand what happened in that classroom, you need to understand the girl who refused to break. Maya Thompson had been the new student at Ridgemont Elementary for exactly 3 weeks when the first incident occurred. Her family had relocated to Virginia Beach from San Diego after her mother received new orders, and Maya had learned long ago that military life meant constantly being the stranger in someone else's established world. She had attended 6 different schools by the time she was 11 years old. She knew how to read a room the way some children knew how to read picture books. She could tell within the first hour which teachers would be kind, which students would become friends, and which corners of the playground were safe. Ridgemont Elementary sat on a tree-lined street in a neighborhood where the lawns were always green and the mailboxes were painted in matching colors. It looked like something from a postcard, the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Maya had walked through those double doors on her first day, wearing a yellow sundress her grandmother had picked out, her hair braided in neat cornrows with small gold beads that clicked softly when she moved. She carried a backpack shaped like a ladybug, a gift from her mother before the last deployment. The backpack was 2 years old now and slightly worn at the straps, but Maya refused to replace it. Some things were worth holding on to even when they showed their age. Her mother, Lieutenant Commander Denise Thompson, was not like other mothers. She did not bake cookies for school fundraisers or volunteer for field trip supervision. She could not attend back-to-school nights or parent conferences on predictable schedules. Denise Thompson was one of the first Black women to complete the grueling training required to become a Navy SEAL, and her work took her to places Maya was not allowed to ask about, and for lengths of time Maya never got used to. When people asked what her mother did for a living, Maya had learned to keep her answers simple. "She's in the Navy," she would say, and most of the time that was enough. But the truth was so much bigger than that simple sentence could hold. The truth was that her mother had spent the better part of 2 decades proving that she belonged in rooms where people assumed she had wandered in by mistake. The truth was that Denise Thompson had broken barriers that were supposed to be unbreakable, and she had done it while raising a daughter who watched her from across oceans and counted the days until she would see her face again. For the first 2 weeks at Ridgemont Elementary, Maya kept mostly to herself. She answered questions in class with quiet precision, completed her homework with careful attention, and spent her lunch periods reading on a bench near the oak tree at the far end of the schoolyard. She had learned that it was better to observe before engaging, to understand the social landscape before attempting to plant her flag anywhere. Most of the students seemed curious about her, but kept their distance, the way children often do when they are not sure whether the new kid will be worth the risk of friendship. There was one girl named Sophie with red hair and a gap-toothed smile who invited Maya to sit with her group at lunch on the 3rd day. Maya accepted cautiously and found herself laughing by the end of the meal. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to imagine that this school might be different from the others, that maybe she would finally get to stay somewhere long enough to make memories that lasted. But then there was Mrs. Hargrove. Patricia Hargrove had been teaching 5th grade at Ridgemont Elementary for 14 years. She was the kind of teacher parents requested by name. the kind who received apple-shaped gifts at Christmas and tearful thank you cards at graduation. She had a reputation for being strict but fair, for pushing students to achieve their potential, for running a classroom where excellence was expected and excuses were not tolerated. She wore her silver hair in a neat bob and favored cardigans in muted colors, and when she smiled, the lines around her eyes crinkled in a way that suggested warmth. But Maya noticed something on her very first day that she could not quite name, something in the way Mrs. Hargrove's eyes moved past her as if she were a piece of furniture that had been placed in the wrong room. When Maya raised her hand to answer a question about the American Revolution, Mrs. Hargrove called on another student instead. When Maya turned in her first essay, it came back marked with criticism so harsh they seemed designed to wound rather than teach. "Your arguments lack sophistication," the red ink declared. "This reads like something a much younger child would write." Maya had stared at those words for a long time that night, sitting at the small desk in her bedroom while her grandmother made dinner in the kitchen downstairs. She had always been a good student. Her previous teachers had praised her writing, had used her essays as examples for the class. She did not understand what she had done wrong. But Maya understood something else, something she recognized in her bones with a certainty that should not belong to an 11-year-old child. She understood that some people decided who you were before you ever opened your mouth. Some people looked at the color of your skin and wrote a story about you in their heads, and nothing you did or said could ever change the ending they had already chosen. The night before everything changed, Maya sat on her bed holding a small photograph in a silver frame. It showed her mother in dress uniform, standing tall against a backdrop of American flags, her expression serious, but her eyes filled with something that looked like pride. Maya's grandmother had taken the picture at a ceremony 2 years earlier, one of the rare occasions when the family could gather to witness the public version of Denise's accomplishments. Maya ran her finger across the glass, tracing the outline of her mother's face. It had been 4 months since she had seen her in person, 3 weeks since their last video call, which had been cut short when something urgent pulled Denise away mid-sentence. Maya had learned not to ask questions about the interruptions. She had learned that loving a mother who served meant accepting the silences, the absences, the constant low hum of worry that never fully went away. Around her neck, Maya wore a thin silver chain with a small pendant shaped like a trident, the symbol of the Navy SEALs. Her mother had given it to her on her 9th birthday, had clasped it around her neck with gentle hands and told her that no matter how far apart they were always connected. "This represents everything I fight for," Denise had said, her voice low and serious. "But you, Maya, you are what I come home for. Never forget that." Maya whispered those words to herself now, her fingers closing around the pendant. She could feel its familiar weight against her chest, could draw strength from it the way a sailor draws strength from sighting land after months at sea. Tomorrow would be a new day. Maybe Mrs. Hargrove would see her differently. Maybe things would get better. They did not get better. The next morning started like any other. Maya dressed carefully, double-checked her backpack for her completed homework, and walked the 7 blocks to school with her grandmother by her side. The autumn air was crisp and golden, the trees along the sidewalk just beginning to show hints of orange and red. It was the kind of morning that felt full of promise, the kind that made you believe good things were possible. When Maya entered Mrs. Hargrove's classroom, she took her seat in the 3rd row and arranged her materials with quiet precision. She was determined to have a good day. She was determined to give no one any reason to look at her with anything other than respect. The trouble began during the morning's current events discussion. Mrs. Hargrove had asked students to share news stories they had seen or heard about over the weekend, and several hands shot up with reports about local football games, a new movie release, and a science discovery about dinosaurs. Then a boy named Tyler mentioned that his father had shown him a documentary about special forces operations, and the class erupted with excited chatter about military movies and video games. Mrs. Hargrove indulged the conversation for a few minutes, sharing that her own nephew had served in the Army and that military service was one of the noblest callings a person could pursue. That was when Sophie turned to Maya with bright eyes and an encouraging smile. "Maya, doesn't your mom do something in the military?" The question was innocent, offered with the genuine curiosity of a new friend who wanted to help Maya feel included. Maya hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. Yes, she said, her voice clear but careful. My mom is a Navy SEAL. The silence that followed was different from other silences Maya had experienced. It was not the respectful hush that often followed impressive revelations. It was something else entirely. Something colder. Mrs. Hargrove's face underwent a transformation that happened so quickly, Maya almost missed it. The teacher's pleasant expression flickered like a television losing signal, and what emerged underneath was something sharp and ugly. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hargrove said, her voice carrying a sweetness that did not reach her eyes. Did you say your mother is a Navy SEAL? Maya nodded again, her hand instinctively moving to touch the trident pendant beneath her shirt. Yes, ma'am, she's a lieutenant commander. A few students whispered excitedly, clearly impressed. But Mrs. Hargrove was not impressed. Mrs. Hargrove let out a short laugh that sounded like something breaking. Well, she said, walking slowly toward Maya's desk, that's certainly quite a story. The word story landed like a slap. It's not a story, Maya said, her voice steady despite the warning signals firing in her chest. It's the truth. Mrs. Hargrove stopped beside Maya's desk and looked down at her with an expression that mixed pity with contempt. Sweetheart, she said, and the endearment dripped with a condescension. The Navy SEALs are one of the most elite military units in the world. The training is incredibly demanding. It's really not appropriate to make up tales just to impress your classmates. The other students had gone completely still, their eyes darting between the teacher and Maya like spectators at a match they did not fully understand. Sophie's face had gone pale, her mouth slightly open. I'm not making it up, Maya said, her voice rising slightly. My mom completed Bud/S training. She was one of the first women to finish. She's been on deployments all over the... That's enough, Mrs. Hargrove's voice cracked like a whip. I will not have you telling lies in my classroom. If your mother works in the Navy, she probably has some administrative position. Perhaps she files paperwork or works in the cafeteria. There's no shame in honest work, but there is shame in dishonesty. The classroom seemed to shrink around Maya. She could feel the eyes of her classmates pressing against her skin, could feel her face growing hot with a combination of embarrassment and righteous anger. Her mother was not a liar. Her mother was a hero. Her mother had earned every medal, every commendation, every inch of respect that the world so reluctantly gave her. And this woman, this teacher with her silver hair and her muted cardigans, and her crinkled eyes that suddenly seemed capable of nothing but cruelty, was trying to take that away. My mom is a Navy SEAL, Maya said again, and this time her voice did not waver at all. I have pictures. I have her trident pin at home. I can prove it. Mrs. Hargrove's face flushed red, and something dangerous flickered in her expression. Later in the investigations that followed, several students would describe that look and struggle to find words for it. It was the look of someone who had been challenged in a way they could not tolerate. Someone who had drawn a line and found that an 11-year-old girl had dared to step over it. I said that's enough. The teacher's hand came down on Maya's desk with a force that sent her pencil case clattering to the floor. I am tired of this disrespect. I am tired of people like you thinking you can walk into my classroom and demand special treatment with your invented stories and your attitude. The phrase people like you hung in the air, its meaning unmistakable. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Tyler's face had gone from curious to confused to something approaching, frightened. Sophie looked like she might cry. Maya stood up from her desk, her small frame somehow seeming larger than it had moments before. My mother has served this country for 18 years, she said, and her voice carried the quiet steel of someone who had learned dignity from a woman who demanded it. She has sacrificed more than you will ever understand, and I will not sit here and listen to you call her a liar. Mrs. Hargrove's composure shattered completely. Her hands shot out, grabbing Maya's desk and shoving it backward with such force that Maya stumbled, her books and papers scattering across the floor in a chaotic cascade. Get out, the teacher hissed, her finger pointing toward the door like a weapon. Get out of my classroom. I will not have liars here, especially liars like you. The words were barely out of her mouth when the classroom door opened. Nobody had heard the footsteps in the hallway. Nobody had seen the shadow approaching through the frosted glass panel beside the door. What they saw now was a woman who seemed to fill the doorframe, not with size, but with presence. She wore a crisp Navy service uniform, the ribbons on her chest catching the fluorescent light in bars of color that represented years of service and sacrifice. Her hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, her posture so straight it seemed to challenge gravity itself. Her face was Maya's face, 25 years forward, and her eyes held a calm that was somehow more terrifying than any rage could have been. Lieutenant Commander Denise Thompson had come home early. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Mrs. Hargrove's face went through a rapid series of transformations as her brain tried to process what her eyes were seeing. The uniform, the trident pin gleaming on the chest, the unmistakable bearing of someone who had spent years leading missions in the world's most dangerous places. The teacher's pointed finger slowly dropped to her side. Her mouth opened and closed twice without producing any sound. She looked like someone watching their own nightmare walk into the waking world. "Mom." Maya's voice broke on the single syllable, but she did not run to her mother immediately. She stood there among her scattered books, her chin lifted, her eyes shining with tears she finally allowed herself to feel. Denise Thompson's gaze swept the room, taking in the scene with the precision of someone trained to assess situations in fractions of seconds. She saw her daughter standing over a mess of papers. She saw the fear on the faces of the children. She saw the teacher who looked like she might collapse. And she understood. "I received a call from the principal," Denise said, her voice calm and measured. "Something about my daughter being sent to the office for disciplinary issues. I decided to come directly." She stepped fully into the room, and with each step she took, Mrs. Hargrove seemed to shrink. The teacher's face had gone from red to white, and her hands were trembling slightly at her sides. "I was just," Mrs. Hargrove stammered. "There was a misunderstanding. The girl, your daughter," she claimed. "She said that you were—" She could not finish the sentence. "A Navy SEAL?" Denise provided, her eyebrow raised slightly. "Yes, I am. Is that a problem?" The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Every child in that classroom would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. They would tell this story at dinner tables, in college dorms, at their own children's schools, and in therapy sessions where they unpacked everything they had witnessed and learned. They would remember how Mrs. Hargrove's face crumpled, how her professional mask fell away to reveal something small and ugly underneath. They would remember how Maya's mother stood there like a monument to everything the teacher had tried to deny, and how the silence stretched on until it became unbearable. "I think," Denise said slowly, "we should have a conversation with the principal. All of us." She held out her hand to Maya, and her daughter moved through the scattered papers to take it. Their fingers interlocked, and for a moment they just stood there together. Mother and daughter, a united front against a world that too often tried to diminish them. As they walked toward the door, Denise paused and turned back to Mrs. Hargrove. The teacher had not moved. She seemed rooted to the spot, her face a mask of horror and dawning realization about what was about to happen to her career, her reputation, everything she thought she had built. "My daughter," Denise said quietly, "has spent her entire life watching me fight for a seat at tables where people said I didn't belong. She has moved 6 times in 11 years, said goodbye to friends more often than any child should, and fallen asleep not knowing whether her mother would come home from the places I couldn't tell her about. She has earned the right to speak the truth about who I am and what I do. She has earned respect, and she will receive it." The meeting that followed lasted 3 hours. The principal, a man named Robert Garrison, who had been at Ridgemont Elementary for almost as long as Mrs. Hargrove, listened with growing horror as the situation was explained. Several students were brought in to provide their accounts of what had happened, and their stories aligned perfectly. Sophie cried as she described the look on Maya's face when her desk was shoved.